Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Michael Wilson, and I'm the webinar producer for KardasLarson. Today's session is Performance Reviews, Are They Now Obsolete? This presentation will provide you with some helpful hints on navigating through this often difficult process of manager-employee feedback and performance development. Now for a few housekeeping notes. Everyone on the line is muted by default. Please type any questions into the question box, and we'll answer them at the end or as relevant. Please tweet about this webinar using hashtag KardasLarson and hashtag performance management. You can also download a handout that goes along with this presentation before or at the end of the webinar. You can find it just above the questions box. There should be a handouts panel in your control panel. And we value your feedback, so please take the survey that you receive tomorrow, and attached to that email will be a recording of this webinar. Now let's meet your presenters. Lisa Schapani and Lois Krause have spent many years helping organizations of all types and sizes to successfully develop and grow both their people and their businesses. Lois has a special expertise in labor law management, while Lisa's proficiency is in leveraging employee performance and development. Both of your presenters are committed to helping you maximize performance. Now I'll turn it over to Lisa to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. We're pleased that you joined us today for our very first KardasLarson webinar. We're going to dive right in, and I'm here to say that performance reviews are not obsolete. They're simply undergoing a much-needed reinvention. Our current performance management systems date back to the late 1800s, when employees were measured by their output, how many hours worked, and the volume of goods produced. Today, 70% of our workforce is employed in service or knowledge-related jobs. While a few enhancements have been made over the years, performance management practices haven't kept pace with the value that most of today's employees bring to the workplace. So, in the next 50 minutes, we will share ideas on how you can make small shifts in your practices and how the law impacts performance management. To get us started, let's do a quick poll so that we can see where you are today in the performance management evolution in your organization. Please tell us the current state of performance management in your organization. Okay, so it looks like about 40% of you have well-defined practices. Some of you have informal performance management practices, and an equal number have current practices and processes that might need to be updated. Well, you're certainly in for some tips to update some of your practices. And for those of you who might just be getting started, you'll also have some things that you can take away today. So let's start with managing for optimal performance. Research has shown that there are 10 critical factors in managing high-performance teams. When you look at these, I believe you'll agree that the statements in blue are in fact performance management behaviors. These are behaviors that both engage employees and drive high performance. So let's move on to the trends that we're seeing out there and take a look at these statistics. I'd like you to take a moment and tell us which statistics you think are true. All right. Looks like we've got a number of you feeling that many of them are true, and in fact, they are all true, and certainly a call to action. And again, we see the correlation between engagement and performance management. Employees who are satisfied with their performance review are satisfied with their jobs. And this engagement really translates into discretionary effort. So what is the future of performance management? We know that performance management behaviors drive engagement, and engagement and retention drive performance. So how do we reinvent our practices and processes? Here are some things that you can really start thinking about today and putting into action today. And the first one being establishing clear accountabilities and expectations. This is really where it all begins. Ensuring that you and your employees know the job content of their role and how the employee is held accountable is truly the foundation for optimal performance. What are the organizational goals and how does my work fit in? Is a question every employee would like answered. And as leaders, we need to help connect the dots for our employees. Gone are the days of the annual performance appraisal event, as it just doesn't work in today's business climate. Waiting to provide performance feedback once a year puts the organization's ability to achieve strong results in jeopardy. We really need to focus more on employee development and success than past performance, and development needs to become a part of an employee's daily work. In most cases, we invest in training reviewing managers on effective performance management behaviors. If we truly want to move the needle, we need to get our employees more involved and create a two-way dialogue around performance. So as I mentioned, it all starts with establishing clear accountabilities and expectations. Your employees want to know what the expectations are for their contribution. Taking the time to document the essential functions of the role and critical competencies will get them started on the right foot. And my guess is that some of you may have some outdated job descriptions out there. Communicating these expectations to each employee and allowing for input and clarification is important to the employee's success. Your businesses are dynamic in nature, and as business changes, so do the skills and roles needed in your organization. Might I suggest that you keep an eye on the future? And your employees will be more than happy to help you redefine roles and keep job descriptions up to date. So I encourage you to involve them. And what does high performance look like in your organization? I've worked with clients to help them establish behavioral expectation scales. And these are very effective at helping both managers and employees understand what your organization views as top performance. The next piece of the puzzle is really to connect individual goals to organizational goals. Setting goals with employees can only occur once the organization has set its goals. And it all begins with the business initiatives. Consider setting stretch goals that allow employees to regularly achieve results. In our more collaborative work environments, you'll also need to consider other team members. Will everyone support the goals you set? I suggest collaborating with your employees to set goals, as this will help them feel a part of the process and begin to draw a line of sight from business initiatives to the work that they do, and ask for their feedback and input into goal setting. In our dynamic workplace, goals can become easily outdated and demotivating. Reviewing goals on a more frequent basis will allow for dialogue with employees and a course correction if needed. And keep in mind that employees need to be aware of how their efforts tie into the organizational strategy. So now I'd like you to use your question box and share with us how you link individual goals to organizational goals. Okay, some of you have talked about beginning by setting goals for the organization, ensuring that that occurs first. And also, managers and employees come to performance feedback sessions with ideas on goals to set. In addition, some of you have talked about managers sharing the strategic organizational goals with work teams and gathering input before solidifying their goals. Thanks for sharing your ideas with us. We're going to move on now. The next thing that you want to consider is increasing real-time feedback. Having more frequent discussions around performance will ensure that employees are on track with their work. Many managers have a very deliberate scheduled time with each employee, which allows them to track progress and provide feedback. I'm working with a client right now that has incorporated both quantitative and qualitative measures into their monthly touch base with the sales team. So essentially, performance is discussed monthly. Employees are appreciative of the immediate feedback and strive to make changes right away. As I mentioned before, gone are the days of the annual event, and on-the-spot feedback is definitely a better way. Employees that are working in cross-functional teams or matrixed organizations need real-time feedback from all leaders. Today, as we set goals at the annual event, they can become obsolete as early as 30 days into the performance year. You may want to consider setting more frequent goals and adjusting with shifts in priorities as the business moves. Another idea is to create a culture where you provide both formal and informal recognition, in addition to supporting employee engagement. Frequent recognition can improve the working relationship with managers and employees. I recently helped a client build a recognition program based on its values. The program had both annual and peer-to-peer recognition components. You may want to leverage social networks to encourage employees to recognize each other. If you have an intranet, that's a great way that you can leverage the social piece. The thing to remember is to really keep it simple. And finally, become a servant leader. Asking what you can do to help your employees shows that you're invested in their success. There may be obstacles that are keeping them from high performance, and you as their leader may be able to clear the way. The next thing that we're going to talk about is employee development. And again, I'm curious to know how you accomplish employee development in your organization. So take a minute to answer these poll questions. Okay, great news. Most of you use all of the strategies that are discussed here. We're going to talk a little bit more about these strategies, and I see that we have an opportunity really to encourage perhaps more mentoring and connecting with others. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. So when you're looking at these strategies, one of the pieces that you want to keep in mind is that some strategies have a higher ROI in terms of the investment as well as in terms of what we say the learning sticking and being able to be transferred back to the job. So if you look at this particular slide here, many employees view classroom training as employee development. And while the classroom training should be a small part of your development strategy, it's really not the be-all, end-all. And the way that the ROI is listed on this particular slide is that full job and being fully immersed in your job is really where you gain the most learning and the highest return on investment. And you'll notice that classroom is lower on the list. So in fact, classroom tends to be very low in terms of retention as well as ROI. Today's organizations with the highest return on investment and a highly engaged workforce have a well-crafted strategy that includes company-sponsored or classroom training, connecting and mentoring with others, and on-the-job learning experiences. In fact, I recommend that on-the-job learning experiences represent the largest piece of your pie, somewhere around 60 to 70% of your strategy. Why, you ask? Because these experiences provide the greatest return on investment in terms of learning transfer and acquiring the right skills to be successful in your organization. I recently worked with a client who simply educated their employees on the different methods of employee development and showed them that the experiences that they were a part of did contribute heavily to their development. This educational campaign and some shifts in their development strategy paid off with significantly higher scores around employee development on their annual engagement survey. So I encourage you, educate your employees on developmental opportunities and help them find ways to connect with other talented employees through online communities and directories. Here's a sneak peek at the future of employee development, which also includes managers becoming the primary developer of employees using coaching skills. These strategies represent the largest areas for growth in usage over the next 2 years. Some of them may be a little more complex in nature to start in your organization, but the strategies in blue are some things that you can implement today in your organization. If you look at action learning projects, You could have employees involved in working on a business challenge. Job rotations and shadowing, learning different function of the business through a formal rotation, or even just spending the afternoon with someone in a different department and learning how that person's role affects the organization. Stretch assignments, either through increased responsibility or perhaps some project work in addition to their core work. And then knowledge sharing platforms, which we know are critical for our millennials, using the internet or even brown bag lunch topics. The next way to reinvent your performance management behaviors is focused on creating a shared approach. Many organizations have moved to a performance management model that includes self-appraisals. Self-appraisals provide employees the opportunity to highlight their accomplishments and strengths and helps the manager to remember the employee's contributions. These are an excellent way to begin a two-way conversation. As we talked about before, in aligning performance goals with organizational goals and initiatives, including employees in goal setting and gathering input will help to increase motivation and the desire to achieve a higher level of performance. Today, our work involves cross-functional teams, matrix reporting relationships, and project work. For employees to be successful, they need to have feedback from various sources. It's no longer just their supervisor that observes their work, and they're appreciative of feedback from everyone. When you think about performance feedback, I suggest that the magic is in the conversation and not the completion of the forms. To create the magic, I believe that both employees and managers need to learn how to have productive conversations with each other. We need to support and provide learning opportunities for both parties. And again, I'd like to hear from you. Use your question box to share how you encourage productive performance conversations in your organization. I see some of you hold annual training on how to get the most out of performance appraisals. That's terrific. And you encourage your managers to gather employees' input in all discussions. Some of you even have quarterly touch bases. There's a lot of coaching and training that seems to be going on with both managers and associates. So you look like you're well on your way to creating some strategies to support increasing collaboration when it comes to performance management. So we've talked about some ideas and best practices for updating our performance management behaviors. We still need to be legally compliant. And now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Lois, our legal expert.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. We will now take a look at things from the legal perspective. Normally, formal performance reviews have a method for documentation with dates, signatures, and documented changes during the discussion. However, performance discussions that are more spontaneous are usually not documented, whether they be positive or negative. In real estate, they say the three most important things are location, location, location. In HR, especially in performance reviews, those things are documentation, documentation, documentation. I recommend that there should always be some sort of documentation made of any performance communication. Do you document the comment in the hallway of "nice job on that comment at the meeting"? Probably not, unless there was something that was more extensive that that comment was referring to. If an employee is having problems with performance and you have an informal discussion with them about how things are going, or you discuss what help that person needs from the manager to be successful, absolutely document that, even if it's just a note in the manager's calendar to note the discussion, what was said, and what the outcome of the discussion was. I suggest the manager use that discussion to suggest training or a performance improvement plan. Those details need to be documented somewhere, or it will not be done or followed up on. What is the ultimate goal here? As Lisa pointed out earlier, it should be employee engagement and two-way communication. Most people know to document one of those "things are not going well" discussions, but routinely leave out documentation of positive performance discussions unless they are in the formal yearly review. If an employee is doing a really great job on a project or came up with a great idea and the manager encouraged them to run with it, I recommend that the manager or the team leader, etc., recognize the employee by sending a kudo email to the employee's manager or upline manager or director or even the president, explaining that great performance, and then copy the employee and copy HR and ask HR to put a copy of this kudo email into the employee's file. Why? What happens when a coach only focuses on all the mistakes that the team members make? They usually do not get better. They feel terrible about themselves, and they get worse. When the coach focuses on the positive, the team members usually try to duplicate that performance, and then they get better. If there are things going wrong, the coach gives a drill or some training to correct the mistakes and increase positive performance. The coach knows that positive reinforcement of good performance routinely encourages the person to become more engaged. If you act like a coach, you can open up two-way communication between the employee and management and actually raise the performance to the next level. Just remember to document the session. Now, Connecticut state law requires a statement of an employee's right to add their comments to any document that records their performance or behavior. It must be clearly stated in bold on the document. Although this is only a Connecticut law, I recommend this as a best practice for all. The statement in bold on the slide is an example of what to write on your documents. It does not have to be this statement exactly, but it must be clearly state the rights of the employee. Many performance reviews today have an employee self-evaluation component in them, and management may believe that this will satisfy the statement of employee rights as required, but it does not. This statement must be stated at the bottom above the signature section to be compliant. Additionally, this will encourage more two-way communication between the employee and the manager if the employee understands that they can add to the document. The self-evaluation is always good to remind a manager of the employee's contributions that may not have been remembered, especially if they only look at performance every year, which I do not recommend. However, a manager usually has a plan for goals and objectives for the employee for the upcoming year, in addition to the evaluation of the past year. So there may be things on the formal document that may be incomplete or may have items listed that the employee disagrees with. They must have a chance to make their own comments after the evaluation discussion. This is really a good thing and not something for managers to be upset about. Here is another way to create open, two-way communication between the employee and management. This process should always be a chance to open these communication lines and to have a frank, even discussion and document that will go into the employee's file and help to create employee development. A manager should encourage employee input to the form if there is any question about the original document. I have seen client managers not give their employees more goals than the manager thinks the employee can handle because the process suggests not giving more than 3 to 5 goals. I have seen employees request an extra goal that has meaning to them for their development. If they do not have the right or feel as if they have no say, the manager may be hampering their development, which is just the opposite of what the process was meant for in the first place. This bold statement ensures that everyone is on the same page before it goes into the employee file and or is used as a template for upcoming yearly performance. It also shows that the company is not only being compliant, but actually respects the employee's input. Our next section is discrimination. And this is the trickiest legal issue in performance management. Most of the time, the forms or performance management systems have standard categories in them that seem to be objective on their face value. But you must realize a specific rating in a specific category may seem the same for any employee, but may not take other areas into consideration that may be different for different employees. Special circumstances must be reviewed before the manager can ensure a non-discriminatory evaluation. Okay, please take a minute or two to take our poll about discriminatory statements, and then we will discuss all of them. You can choose one or more. Okay. It seems that few of you feel that D, the employee doesn't seem to have the knowledge to perform the duties. That was the least likely one to be discriminatory. And most of the rest of you feel that all of them seem to, or at least 59% of you feel that all of them could be discriminatory. Well, I have to tell you that every single one of those statements could have a discriminatory reaction. I mean, it could be a discriminatory statement, depending on the situation. In A, employee has exceeded the absence limit for company policy. I had a client with a woman who surpassed the policy for absences due to being on intermittent FMLA and needed to take care of her husband. The manager wanted to give her a poor rating on performance review because she had been out so many days or parts of days. I told him why that was not permitted by law, and we worked out a schedule so she was able to make up some of the work at home at times. She was ultimately promoted to supervisor of her department. And perhaps an employee may need an ADA or a religious accommodation. these things must be researched ahead of time. With B, the employee routinely disregards company dress code. Perhaps an employee has broken the dress code policy because of a religious or an ADA accommodation. Everybody heard about the Abercrombie & Fitch's look policy that was in the news. It was found to be discriminatory towards a Muslim woman by the courts. And perhaps a person has a medical condition and needs an ADA accommodation, so they have to wear something different. In C, the employee arrives to work after the start time 2 times per week. Perhaps the employee is on intermittent FMLA and comes in late 2 times a week because they went to therapy first, or they have an ADA accommodation because this is a chronic condition. I had a client with a group of very religious employees that needed to attend services at certain times, so they had to make a religious accommodation for those employees' services schedules. Now D, the employee doesn't seem to have knowledge to perform duties. Perhaps management did not explain correctly because the person was a minority, female, different culture or religion, and the manager discriminated against them originally, and it was an unconscious bias on the manager's part. And E, the employee doesn't communicate well with peers or managers. I had a client with an employee that was mildly autistic, but had been mainstreamed. He was not good with verbal communication, so he was given an ADA accommodation and was allowed to communicate via a written report at the end of the shift. I have another client who have some employees from Guyana, and a few of them had problems with women. There were a large amount of females in the department, and they also have a female supervisor, so they had a problem communicating things under those circumstances. One of the senior workers, also from Guyana, had learned to communicate well with the female supervisor. So we made a cultural accommodation by making this one senior worker the group leader, and the rest reported to him, and he reported to the female supervisor. The female supervisor disseminated the information to the rest of the department herself, males and females together as a group. So just remember, all reviews are somewhat subjective by nature, and managers must make sure that they consider all things before they turn a bit of subjectivity into discrimination. Reviews must be specific to the individual employee. Managers must know about it and keep any special circumstances specific to that employee in mind when writing comments. Senior management and HR needs to ensure the reviewing manager has the specific information to be armed, I put that in air quotes, with everything necessary to be as objective as possible. Now, to summarize the legal part, we need to stay on the right side of the law, keep out of court, and develop your employees and your business. Make sure you document all performance communication, whether it be formal, informal, good, bad, or ugly, even if it's just in the manager's calendar. It will help with follow-up and compliance and open the door to two-way communication to increase positive employee performance. You need to ensure you inform your employees of their right to contribute to their performance documentation by using the statement on any document presented to them in bold, just above the signature line. And keep performance communication free from discrimination by informing reviewing managers of special circumstances of each of their employees and training the manager on unconscious biases they may have. Make sure you also talk to the manager about possible cultural differences with employees to ensure they are sensitive to all. If you follow these tips, you can stay on the right side of the law and help to increase your employees' performance and engagement. Now, I would like to invite you to go to your question box and share any ahas that you've gained from this presentation. Write them in there. And while you're writing those in, I will turn this presentation back over to Lisa. Lisa?
Thank you, Lois. So as Lois said, take a minute and share with us your ahas. So we have some folks that didn't necessarily know about the bold statement, Lois, and also the piece about sharing positive performance and documenting that as well and how critical that is. We also have some people who feel that they are on the right track with what they're doing, so congratulations. And we have folks that are opening the evaluation process to multiple managers to be helpful, and that performance management is in fact a two-way communication process. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. And so let's move on in terms of the bottom line with regard to what we've talked about today. So performance management behaviors are more important now than ever to drive organizational performance. As we talked about, these same behaviors influence engagement and retention and are vital to maximizing performance. Re-engineering of the performance management practices and processes is underway as our work has become more dynamic and our employees bring greater knowledge and value to the workplace. Organizations are looking for small changes that will create a large impact and be more responsive to the business environment. Organizations are moving away from the out-of-date annual event to creating conversations around performance and development daily. Managers are scheduling more frequent discussions around performance and inviting employee input. Organizations are creating practices that include more collaborative conversations so that employees don't feel as though performance management is being done to them, and managers are feeling less stressed about having conversations. It's about building a relationship that includes open, honest dialogue around performance. Documentation is still an important performance management behavior, and amplifying good performance goes a long way. With a very diverse workforce in this knowledge-based economy, it's critical that managers understand the unique needs of each employee on their team. It's no longer one size fits all. So this concludes our presentation, and we do have some time left for Q&A. Before we move into Q&A, I just want to remind you to download the handout located above your question queue, as that's a terrific self-assessment in terms of some of the behaviors needed to optimize performance. So as I mentioned, we have a few minutes left for questions, so I encourage you to use your question box and provide us with any questions that you'd like us to answer. One of our questions is, may you have a copy of the presentation? And we will be sending you the presentation recording tomorrow, along with a questionnaire. We have another question around how many times during the year should employees be reviewed. And the way I like to answer that is it really has a lot to do with your company and your practices and how ready your organization is to create more frequent performance discussions. As we talked about today, many companies are moving away from just one annual review. If you're a company that has one annual review, you might think about, could we talk about performance 2 times a year or maybe quarterly? So you really need to look at what your organization is ready to take on. We have a question around companies like GE and some of the larger Fortune 500 companies who have moved away from review ratings in favor of discussions. How would you adopt a performance review system in a pay-for-performance culture without ratings? And you may notice that we stayed away from talking ratings in our presentation. The rating systems absolutely are undergoing reinvention out there, and there are a number of different approaches, and the approach that most companies have started to take is to separate performance appraisals as the key drivers of compensation increases, and some are moving to adding team bonuses and a number of different ways to look at compensation. So there certainly are some ideas out there, and we'd be happy to talk with you further about those. And then we have a question, what are your thoughts around automated performance management tools, and can we recommend a tool? We certainly believe in automated performance tools, and again, I think you need to look at your individual company in terms of where you are in your readiness, what your budget is, and really what you want to get out of an automated performance management tool. There are a number of products out there to meet different budgets, and again, that's something that we could talk with you based on your individual organizational needs.
I see a legal question here.
All right.
That they're asking, do employees need to sign the annual review, and what do you do if an employees disagree and don't want to sign the review? Well, if an employee does not have to sign a review, annual or biannual or whenever you do it, but you would note on the review itself that the employee refused to sign it. And if the employee disagree and then and that's why they don't want to sign it, I would encourage them to add their comments to the document and say, but if you add your comments, you need to sign the fact that these are your comments that are going into the document, because the manager will sign it and say that this is what they said, and if you disagree, encourage them to add theirs and have them sign it. But if they don't want to add their comments and they don't want to sign it, you just have the manager note that the employee refused to sign it and put it into the file, and tell the employee that here's your copy, this is going into the file, and if you want to add comments, you need to put a signature to those comments. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you, Lois. And our commitment was to spend 50 minutes with you, and we have now reached that time frame. So I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Michael for any final thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all for attending this KardasLarson webinar. Please be on the lookout for an email tomorrow with a survey and a recording of this presentation. We will now be signing off.